Hey, this is Cedric Youngelman, your host of the Bitcoin Matrix podcast. Thank you so much for checking out my show, where we have philosophical conversations about the economic, cultural, and psychological implications of Bitcoin. Please make sure that you're subscribed to the Bitcoin Matrix. And if you're watching this on YouTube, smash that like button so that more people see it and put those notifications on so you don't miss out on any fresh and dope content. This episode with David Zell about the Bitcoin Policy Institute is brought to you by River. Buy Bitcoin with zero fees on recurring orders when you dollar cost average at river.com. Buy Bitcoin with zero fees on recurring orders when you dollar cost average at river.com. Truly the best way to build your Bitcoin wealth. River doesn't use or lend your Bitcoin. All Bitcoin at River is held in secure cold storage with 100% full reserves. You can withdraw your Bitcoin at any time. Unlock the possibilities of this revolutionary digital asset with River. Sure, you've bought Bitcoin before, but have you tried River? See and feel the difference for yourself at river.com. River has a level of service that is unheard of in this industry. The world is grasping the importance of decentralized money with limited supply. Your friends and family could use your help realizing it. River's referral program will add $20 in free Bitcoin to both of your accounts. To get started and find out for yourself, use the link in the show notes and get $20 free when you buy Bitcoin at river.com or on the River app. There's no better time than now to get your sats off your exchange. My favorite hardware wallet is the Cold Card from CoinKite, and it's definitely worth learning how to use it. Built-in sleep at night technology, ultra secure signing device, aka a hardware wallet for Bitcoin. CoinKite is a leader in security and hardware manufacturer, established block 141,000. CoinKite, maker of some of the most iconic Bitcoin products such as OpenDime, the Cold Card, Sats Card, Tap Signer, Sats Chip, the Block Clock, and the Micro Block Clock. Use the link in the show notes for 5% off your order. TikTok Next Block, an idea whose time has come, cannot be stopped. Join your fellow Bitcoiners in Miami Beach for the biggest annual celebration of Bitcoin in the world. Don't miss out. I can't wait to see you all there and grab an ice-cold beer. Join us in making history in Miami Beach this May 18th to 20th. To get 10% off your ticket and help support me and the show, use the code MATRIX. And if you buy a whale pass with the code MATRIX, just send me proof and we'll go out for lunch or dinner in Miami on me, my treat during the conference. And now, let's enter the Bitcoin Matrix with David Zell.
What is real? How do you define real?
You can't jump into cash. Cash is trash. What do? You get out.
David Zell is a co-founder and co-executive director of the Bitcoin Policy Institute and advisor to Bitcoin Magazine. The Bitcoin Policy Institute, a think tank dedicated to Bitcoin research, activism, and education, has announced the Bitcoin Policy Summit taking place April 26, 2023 in Washington, D.C. The summit's website describes the event as a one-day, invite-only policy conference exploring Bitcoin as a strategic opportunity for the United States. Speakers in attendance come from a variety of professional and political backgrounds. Headliners include U.S. Senator Cynthia Lummis, House Representative Tom Emmer, Krebs Stamos, Director of Intelligence and BPI Fellow Matthew Pines, the Human Rights Foundation CSO Alex Gladstein, and many other well-known figures. Several different panels are listed on the agenda. Also, networking opportunities available for those in attendance, with a lot of times for coffee, happy hour, and heavy hors d'oeuvres. David, welcome to the Bitcoin Matrix podcast. How are you?
I am great, man. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat. I've gotten to hear you on what Bitcoin did a few times, and also been watching you on Twitter, and it's just really an interesting topic. And I'd love to get to know more about the Bitcoin Policy Institute, and maybe that's a great place to start. So, what maybe inspired you to start the Bitcoin Policy Institute, and what exactly is it?
Yeah, I'm not sure that's actually a question, at least the first part I've talked about too much, I guess, like my inspiration for it. So I'll start there and then talk about, what we do at BPI. I kind of been following Bitcoin for a while. I was in the same program in college as the guy that bought Bitcoin magazine from Vitalik way back when, David Bailey. And so, sort of paying attention to Bitcoin, but never all that closely. Like I wasn't super online, wasn't really tweeting, was just kind of like lurking and like watching accounts, watching Bitcoin kind of come up in the news a lot. The way that I sort of decided to work in Bitcoin, it was during the 2021 sort of infrastructure bill that had a bunch of really bad language for Bitcoin, and that was the first time that I'd ever really considered like doing sort of work in the space, because I'm not the most technical person. Like my background is in political science and in research. Like I was a debater in high school and college. I won national championships in those. So Bitcoin was just something that I thought was interesting, and I'd used it pretty early, like in middle school actually. So I'd kind of grown up with it. I interned that summer for David at BTC Inc. And then, when the infrastructure bill sort of fiasco happened afterward, I was like, oh, wow, there is perhaps something I can do in service of Bitcoin that aligns well with my skill set. And so I worked at Bitcoin Magazine for about a year, sort of leading their policy efforts, which was at that time was kind of just taking meetings with staffers when we could, answering questions, writing like one pagers about here's what Bitcoin is, here's why it's good, here's, responses to the criticisms that you've likely been hearing. And in the course of doing that, I got to know Congressman Warren Davidson. And he's obviously sort of been a staunch champion of Bitcoin on the House side for a while now. And I asked him in a meeting, what's sort of missing from this picture? Like, what could you most use in the work that you're doing? Like, what would be most helpful for you to kind of continue advancing the positions that you've been advancing on Bitcoin? And he sort of, without hesitating, said, that a think tank would be helpful. And the reason why, he explained, is that the sort of critics of Bitcoin among his colleagues don't find it difficult to find credible, university level or sort of just popular press evidence that Bitcoin is bad. Like you can go to the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, recently you may have seen on Twitter, like the MIT Technology Review, and you can find pretty negative research on Bitcoin. Much of it is wrong. And so he said, look, Bitcoin Magazine's great. I like what you guys do. But I can't kind of walk in with a copy of Bitcoin Magazine and, show an article in there to kind of respond to the ways in which the anti-Bitcoin research is being, presented and disseminated. So, it's sort of just like all of my interests kind of converged at once. It was like, I love, I'd done policy debate. I loved kind of research and writing. I liked Bitcoin a lot. And I saw that there was like a real white space in DC, not only for this content about Bitcoin, but also work that helped policymakers understand Bitcoin in the context of like 16,000 like shitcoins, basically. Because in DC, like there's no Bitcoin policy. It's all digital asset policy. Like Bitcoiners talk about Bitcoin policy because most of them are interested in the policy that affects Bitcoin. We're called the Bitcoin Policy Institute because we're predominantly interested in the policy that affects Bitcoin. But there's no Bitcoin policy in DC. It's all digital asset regulation, crypto policy, what have you. And that just seemed to me like as a Bitcoiner really odd, because there's a lot under the umbrella of digital assets, but none of them felt or sort of seem appropriate to really compare to Bitcoin. And so we founded BPI not just with the thesis that Bitcoin is good for America, but also with the thesis that Bitcoin is fundamentally different and distinct from other digital assets, and so in turn warrants like sort of particular attention. It's sort of laughable to have a conversation about policy for Shiba Inu and for like Bitcoin in the same breath. And so that allows us to take a positioning that I think a lot of Bitcoiners would find probably pretty satisfying, which is that we open up a lot of our sort of meetings with a lot of agreement with, sometimes anti-crypto people, right? We agree that the overwhelming majority of cryptocurrencies are scams. We agree that, many of the digital assets that abound today are likely unregistered securities. Although, we don't really work on that issue, and for the record, think that says more about the Howey test than what those protocols are doing. There are not really, well, I don't want to say that, but what I will say is that sort of positioning of like separating Bitcoin from crypto is not as common as just, you might expect. There are groups that do that really well. But largely, like people in government could not tell you the sort of fundamental differences between Bitcoin and Dogecoin or what have you. And so that seemed like an obvious kind of place to start. So those are sort of the two like theses of BPI, right? That Bitcoin benefits U.S. interests, and that it's as fundamentally different from cryptocurrency. So on that sort of first point. We don't lobby, by the way. It's a kind of common misconception. Like people say, "Oh, you guys are like Bitcoin lobbyists." And that's really not the case. We don't really do work on, we don't try to persuade people to vote certain ways on bills. We are sort of a layer above that, which is just education. And I know from my experience in debate that the narratives that get sort of cemented and spread around something are extremely powerful. And so our sort of thesis is that if we can replace some of the narratives that abound in Washington, like that Bitcoin is, a speculative instrument that's only beneficial to terrorist states and criminals, or that Bitcoin's bad for the environment, or whatever it is, and replace those with things that we think are true about Bitcoin, which is that it benefits sort of free and open societies. It helps undermine authoritarian regimes. It has sort of demonstrated the capacity to, and probably will in a much more profound way, benefit energy grids and the environment. So we tell these stories about Bitcoin because we believe that the stories people hear and the ones that they believe about Bitcoin will ultimately affect how all policy is crafted. Like, it doesn't matter how sharp your lobbyists are if everyone in a room who's a decision maker thinks negative things about the thing you're lobbying for. You're not starting from a great place. So that's sort of who I am, I guess, how I got into doing this. And a little bit about sort of broadly like the mission and thesis of BPI. And then I guess the last part would sort of be how we do that. So we went from idea, like we should have this Bitcoin think tank, we should spread these ideas in Washington. So how do we build that? So my friend Grant and I sort of just built it from scratch, almost like a startup in some ways. We recruited a sort of network of academics and researchers, people who had, credentials that, sort of back to that Davidson anecdote, could be held in parity with those critics of Bitcoin. And recruited, I think our initial cohort size was either 10 or 12, maybe. It may have been 10. But we started with 10 folks, Troy Cross, Matt Pines, Margot Pace, like a lot of names that you've probably seen on Bitcoin Twitter. brought all these like really sharp, interesting people together with different perspectives and said, look, we're going to try to fund you guys to research Bitcoin and write about it. So we started with like very little startup money. We're kind of just winging this. Ended up getting some, contributions early on from David Bailey, from Michael Saylor, from a few other folks. And then that kind of allowed us to turn this from, more of a blog into like a, bona fide think tank. So I'd say we've probably been a real think tank a little less, time than we've been, extant. Like it wasn't really until maybe 60, 90 days in that we, I think really started to do the work that we're sort of doing today, which is to create research that gets shared among policymakers and staffers kind of along the issue areas that we've, cut out as being the most important. Building relationships with staffers who work on digital asset policy, kind of trying to change sort of public opinion by getting like op-eds and things placed in mainstream outlets. Like one of our fellows, Josh Hendrickson, had a really good op-ed placed in, I think it was NBC News, that a lot of people saw. That was kind of his take on why Bitcoin is, completely different from crypto. So yeah, we produce research, we build relationships with staffers, trying to be useful to them, sharing like, well-researched, credible, objective and data-driven, work with them. And we also host events. So up until now, those events have been pretty small, like, 20 to 40 people, like some journalists, a couple staffers, people at some other think tanks. So we've done, sort of 1 hour, 2 hour presentations. We've done like happy hours and lunches. But a few months ago, really when FTX collapsed, we decided that we needed to do an in-person event in DC because the sort of market conditions combined with FTX's downfall gave a lot of sort of legitimation to putting crypto in general, like all of it, in the crosshairs of regulators. And so we're like, well, shit, our mission is to explain why Bitcoin is different from crypto, or at least part of it is. Part of our mission is. There's no better time than right now for, as many people as possible in Washington to hear that message. So yeah, I hope that event, is successful, but we've got, great sponsors already. We've got a great lineup of speakers. I think we're going to have, probably over 100, between 100 and 200 people in attendance. So yeah, I mean, things are looking up for that, and I'm really excited for it because we've spent the last year sort of writing these reports, submitting all of these, comments to the White House, to Treasury, to the Commerce Department. But we have yet to kind of assemble everyone from the team in one place. Like most people that work at BPI, it's not their full-time job. They're all professors or what have you, and kind of do this on the side. So I'm really excited to get everybody from the team together in the same place. But I'm also really excited because I, fingers crossed, think this might be the most impactful thing that we've done as a think tank, since we started. You can sort of compare and contrast those panels, like the ones you read off, the ones on the website, to what is typically said about crypto in DC, and see how sort of different they are. And so yeah, we're excited to share our thesis that that Bitcoin's good for America. And so yeah, that's sort of who I am, why I started BPI, and then kind of how we work and how we got to where we are now.
Yeah, a lot of fascinating things to unpack there. One of the main reasons I wanted to do the show was I've been really thinking a lot about this notion of politics. And when I came to Bitcoin, and I didn't come to Bitcoin as much as I maybe ran into Bitcoin on probably Bitcoin Twitter, when I left what felt like, just the deterioration of Facebook, and I was probably on political Twitter and FinTwit Twitter.
Yeah.
and I stumbled into Bitcoin Twitter. But Bitcoin felt like an escape valve from politics at the time. And it almost felt like I could leave politics behind forever. But I think politics is life. I think it's natural. But I think it's become sort of also a pejorative when you say, oh, I like politics. Or if someone said that to me, I would probably read that differently now, being a Bitcoiner.
Right.
And I don't really like, per se, and I'm not trying to, but just the notion of team sports. And I know what I think about an issue before I've heard the issue and what maybe national politics has become. So to kind of just address some of that, and I just did a show on Bitcoin, the political with Eric Kaysen, but I really want to discuss with you is like, so maybe taking it from a little bit from the Bitcoiner angle of being lost in this wilderness of what is politics now. Do you guys consider yourselves representatives for Bitcoin, or do you speak for Bitcoiners?
Yeah, so no, not really at all. We're not like a community advocacy organization. We also don't really say we speak for Bitcoin ever as well. We sort of just say like, look, we're a team of researchers who've chosen Bitcoin as their sort of research area. I will say part of our goal is certainly being, thought of when conversations about, policy or related to Bitcoin or Bitcoin itself are being had in DC. It's sort of an interesting like line to walk because every other crypto has a lobbying budget. They have centralized foundations or firms that run them. And so if you want to, grab the representatives from the largest stablecoins, the largest DeFi protocols, the largest cryptocurrencies in general, that'd be really easy to do numbers 2 through 10. It'd be pretty hard to get in touch with Satoshi. And so that dynamic means that having some kind of affiliation and signaling to Bitcoin is like important. Like, our name choice was deliberate in that sense, because there's a sort of political saying that's, often repeated that, if you're not at the, I can't remember, if you're not at the lunch, you're on the menu or whatever, if you're not at dinner, you're on the menu. And that dynamic certainly has, not played great in Bitcoin's favor in DC, which is, speaks to, I guess, like the, actual essence of Bitcoin's decentralization, is that there's not a Bitcoin lobbyist or a sort of representative politically for Bitcoin. So no, I mean, we really don't try to represent Bitcoiners, nor do we sort of make any claims as to representing like Bitcoin, the network itself. Although, our view is that the Bitcoin network is good for America, and plenty of Bitcoiners have disagreed with stuff that we've written, which I like and think that's sort of the point in some ways of a think tank. But I think most Bitcoiners, I would hazard to say, probably like our opinions and share many of our opinions about Bitcoin. But to the first part of your question, yeah, I mean, you sort of alluded to it, right? Like man is a political animal, and I guess there is sort of politics, which we can narrowly define as let's say with sort of the maybe like that kind of stereotypical Bitcoiner understanding of politics, like a rigged game, closed doors, people sort of LARPing concern for the public or whatever, but just kind of and I think of it as sort of gross, the swamp, like whatever you want to call it, like that sort of stereotypical image of like backroom deals and wheeling and dealing, and people just sort of enriching themselves like through the state. I'll leave you with that for a second. And there's also the sort of conception of politics that is much broader than that, which is in sort of my mind, just like the realities of life, like the facts of living in an organized society, like amongst our fellow man. We are, even though I think a lot of the libertarian people sometimes kind of disagree or have different takes, I don't really think that we're all a bunch of sovereign individuals, even if aspirationally, many of us are. Like the reality is that we live in, or many of us live in the United States. We live in a country, almost certainly. and our existence is like relational. There are other people in the world that we interact with, and certain people have immense amount of power over other people. And so in that sense, that essence of politics is, I think, what sort of matters more, here. Because people in the United States have the power to make life very difficult for Bitcoiners, and to, in my view, probably not stop Bitcoin, but to probably significantly slow, mass Bitcoin adoption, which we can, get into, because I know some people have different takes on that later. But in this sort of broader sense of politics, it's kind of just like the realist view that, like, I care about thing X, which is Bitcoin. Thing X is at risk of political attack. Ergo, it sort of makes sense to try to stop that from happening, and participate in politics that way. I also find it interesting how many Bitcoiners say, Bitcoin is not political. I think that's one of the views that is parroted in the community that, I always sort of like smile when I see that, I guess, because I understand exactly where people are coming from and like what they're saying, but I've always had the complete opposite view. Like, ever since I guess I as I first encountered Bitcoin, I was not thinking about this in like 7th grade, but sometime after, I guess, probably in like high school, when I started paying a little bit more attention to Bitcoin, actually, because it came up in a debate round. My first reaction was like, this is wildly political. Like, I can't imagine anything more political than Bitcoin. You're talking about sort of re-architecturing the distribution of power, in this case, the power of the sort of creation of money, away from one in which the state had the sort of monopoly power over that, to one in which it did not, and no longer does. So to me, like, I guess coming from a political science, sort of policy background, I was sort of, immediately like fascinated by the inherent political nature of Bitcoin, like what that technology might do to, fundamental power relationships, and what it might do specifically to the relationships between people and the government. So yeah, I've always thought Bitcoin is a, remarkably political project in that sense. Again, not in the sense of lobbying and spending on campaign election, that sort of first definition of politics. But in that second, broader definition, Bitcoin is inherently political for the drastic and unique effect that it has on organized human life. And so to, ignore those changes, I think can happen at one's, own peril. Because if Bitcoin, winds up being as transformative as many of its most like ardent supporters believe it will, it is unreasonable to think that will happen without significant, efforts to stop it. When you're talking about changing some dynamic in society that drastically, there are going to be winners and losers of that, and there are going to be people that are sort of naturally disposed to, not wanting that to happen because they lose power, they lose influence, or they lose whatever it is that they sort of value that they see as being taken away by Bitcoin. So I don't think it's the burden of really Bitcoiners in general to be, extremely politically active. Like, I think, however, there is somewhat of a, I'd say, a logical argument for a Bitcoiner, caring about the sort of political outcome of Bitcoin, and the sort of political, I guess, the interactions that Bitcoin has with the state. Again, not everybody needs to be calling their representatives, but there are times in which that might be, useful, in a sort of strictly instrumental manner. So yeah, I guess to recap my thoughts on that, I agree politics can, and it sort of is, like, inherently a bit slimy. There's a lot of critiques of politics that are well fomented in the public consciousness. I think from my limited experience, most of them are true or directionally accurate. I do think Bitcoin is extremely political, and I think it's for that reason that you know, engaging in that political process, the one that we have before us, is a reasonable endeavor, at least one that's reasonable to me.
Yeah, it's interesting. And, I think we'll probably swing back to, politics, the colloquial version, but to kind of really back out a bit here, I want to talk about what, you talked about a little bit about the vulnerable and power dynamics. And something I kind of run into is if I do get into a conversation with people, and I think there's this inherent notion from maybe people who are progressive or lean left, when the topic of money comes up, not even so much Bitcoin, to think that the person speaking is leaning right or conservative.
Yeah.
And so how do you see Bitcoin helping the most vulnerable?
That's a good question. If you don't mind, I'm actually going to start by addressing another part of something your question touches on, which is the question of sort of is Bitcoin partisan, which is an interesting one. I another sort of line that I hear a lot or see a lot is that Bitcoin is not Bitcoin is bipartisan, which I agree with. I do, in fact, on the sort of layer one, think that take is correct, but I always kind of laugh because saying that Bitcoin is bipartisan is not it's not a spell. It's not like if you say that enough, and it's true that that will sort of wind up being true. I think it would be irresponsible not to point out that as much as I believe Bitcoin is bipartisan, to point out that there have been kind of to your point more conservative voices that have come out in support of it. The detractors have kind of been more on the left, and I'm afraid that often those sort of dynamics can escalate pretty quickly. Until even if something that should have been bipartisan, maybe sort of on some ontological level is bipartisan, becomes in practice very partisan. So I do think that Bitcoin is fundamentally bipartisan. I think it's trending toward being partisan. And I think that that's dangerous and bad for a host of reasons, but not least among them being that whenever something is that partisan in the United States, at least, it just becomes a policy mess because you get these massive kind of yo-yos in terms of it would be very difficult for the industry to or really any sort of Bitcoin business in the US exist when the viability of your business sort of turned on each election. That's sort of bad, obviously. So I guess why Bitcoin helps the most vulnerable. I mean, I think the answers there are sort of evident to most Bitcoiners, but I think for people who don't think about Bitcoin much, that can be an interesting starting point. Bitcoin helps vulnerable people across the world. That sounds like sort of that's a nice turn of phrase, but what do you mean by that? I think the largest beneficiaries of Bitcoin are those in low and middle income countries, particularly in Latin America and Africa. But I think that for the what is it now? It's close to 2 billion people that live under double or triple digit inflation. For the is it 55% of people on planet Earth who live under authoritarian regimes? Bitcoin is profoundly beneficial. In the former, by giving people a means of wealth that is easily transferable, that doesn't rely on local institutions, which can often be corrupt or become inaccessible during times of conflict or unrest. For giving people an alternative to a currency that is like rapidly inflating, like what you see in Venezuela. Those benefits are all pretty clear, and they are also reflected in the sort of best available data that we have on who's using this data is about cryptocurrency, not Bitcoin specifically, but Bitcoin's 40% of the market, same thing. When you look at who's using cryptocurrency for transactional purposes, adjusted per capita, you see these sort of clear similarities between the top 10. They're really all countries that have, or at least overwhelmingly countries that have either runaway inflation or high levels of corruption, weak respect for property rights, oppressive governments. The story there is like really obvious, and it's something that I wish policymakers in the U.S. Paid more attention to. It's something that we try to put a lot of light on. And then for the people living, under authoritarian regimes, I think it's fair to say that a modern authoritarian regime, maybe not as only as strong as its capital controls, but certainly relies on capital controls to maintain a sort of iron grip over its population. The notable example there would be China, where there are strict limits on how much capital you can take out of the country at any given time. There is also in these societies extreme surveillance and monitoring of people without due process, without a Fourth Amendment like we have, or without a presumption of innocence. So it's very likely that, statistically likely that if you're born on planet Earth today, you live in a country that does not guarantee you any sort of fundamental rights as a human, that has every sort of ability and every motivation to treat you like a criminal at all times, and to kind of keep you locked into their system. Here, in these parts of the world, I think Bitcoin is an incredibly powerful tool for empowering people to resist those governments, to undermine those governments, or to reclaim with technology like fundamental political rights that have been denied to them, namely the right to transact. So if someone in an authoritarian regime can use Bitcoin to take money out of that country, to organize a protest when the government would have otherwise shut their bank account down and frozen their transactions, in a society where someone does not want to be treated like a criminal and is not a criminal, wants to evade something like a central bank digital currency or a social credit score, those problems find Bitcoin as a sort of ready solution. So to answer the question sort of specifically, I think that in summary, the most vulnerable people that Bitcoin helps are those in low and middle income countries living under runaway inflation or authoritarian regimes. But yeah, I mean, there's so many reasons that people find value socially in Bitcoin, whether your sort of end is the most vulnerable people or some other end. It is inherently political. It's extremely political, but I've seen people in my life from across the political spectrum find an interest in Bitcoin, from people on the far left to people who are pretty right wing and kind of everything in the middle. I know people who think Bitcoin is cool because sex workers use it, or because like they know that someone in prison, people in prison have used it to, conduct commerce when, the state wouldn't let them. I know people that are, into Bitcoin because they really like Hayek and they think that we need to, denationalize money, and that the government sort of monopoly status of currency production is the root of, a lot of our economic malaise. I mean, it's sad to me that the sort of partisan framing that I fear is concretizing in DC does not really match, like, at least anecdotally, my experience with people that are interested in Bitcoin, because I find them to sort of, like, again, kind of traverse the political spectrum. But yeah, I mean, if I were to talk to someone who is progressive about Bitcoin, there are other things that sort of come to mind as well. One being that in the same way you can kind of conceptualize Bitcoin as disrupting the state's monopoly on the production of money, you can kind of scale that down a layer and talk about the way in which Bitcoin disrupts another really powerful monopoly in Americans' lives, or it's really a duopoly, which is the credit card duopoly, the Visa MasterCard duopoly. The organizations that are responsible for the overwhelming majority of payments in America have been able to build business models that are really not great for consumers and for businesses. They have been sort of defended by political moats, by technological moats, and I think they are in real need of disruption. I think a lot of people in America who have sort of studied payments, may come to similar conclusions. It seems like a weird thing to point out, like, why does it matter what we pay with at the grocery store, or whenever we're buying things? But the sort of fees and fines that rack up over time for overdraft charges, for just your sort of processing fees, the baked in costs to consumers, those add up, especially when you are sort of low income American or low income person. It's actually a very sort of regressive tax, because as a share of your income, everyone's got to buy a good number of things like food, water, housing, whatever it is, and so it is a sort of regressive tax almost on the poorest Americans. And so the ability to for something like Lightning to really go mainstream in the United States and offer people payments that have essentially no fee or an extremely low fee. I don't know if Lightning will really be free, but that's another question. That's a massive impact, although it's a little less sort of personal and gripping as perhaps some of the stories that I've heard about Bitcoin being used in sort of less friendly places than America, less sort of stable places than America, like all over the world. But I think the disruption of the payments duopoly is a noble end as well. So yeah, I mean, Bitcoin definitely helps extremely vulnerable people, and in a way that in a way that governments really haven't, or it can't. Like, it's sort of precisely at the departure from what the government can do that Bitcoin comes in and does some really cool stuff. One of the best examples of that is what happened in Ukraine. Like, I had a number of friends who, like, for them, that was the day that they were like, okay, I actually don't think you're that crazy with your whole Bitcoin thing. Because here you had a government backed by NATO, backed by the United States, get invaded by another country, and we haven't really seen something like that in the modern era in a really long time. So what happened after the invasion began Notably, the banks stopped working, and people couldn't move money around the country. They had a hard time moving money into the country. The Ukrainian government couldn't really spend money. And so for, I think it was like a 3-day period, maybe a 4-day period, uh, the Ukrainian government relied on not just Bitcoin, but Bitcoin, Ethereum. I think they set up a couple, like a stablecoin wallet, uh, but they used this stuff to raise, I can't remember everything they bought, but to buy basically supplies or whatever it was that they needed to repel against this invasion. And sort of it's not like to kind of get into a commentary on the Russia-Ukraine situation, but to say that in this time of extreme crisis, the state and its associated institutions sort of went offline and failed. And Bitcoin sort of popped right in, and facilitated the government receiving I think it ended up being like well over $100 million. So yeah, I think that we will continue to see stories like that. Unfortunately, I think that we will continue to see, especially just because of how much more widespread Bitcoin has become. We'll kind of probably continue seeing these stories like emerge. When crisis happens somewhere, when banks freeze people out, when authoritarian regimes crack down, when central bankers err, gravely, and the populace suffers. I think we'll keep seeing those stories of people turning to this sort of credibly neutral, like independent, monetary network. So I hope that the trend of Bitcoin's politicization reverses. It's something that's sort of top of mind for me, although I'm not. I don't think we can decide the fate of that. I think we can play a part in it. And so, yeah, I want to use BPI for a lot of reasons, but partly to try to prevent Bitcoin from being turned into a partisan football. So,
yeah, the partisan nature of things, it's so daunting. I've seen it in 3 different respects. I've gone through my own arc. I no longer have any desire or feel any compelled to orange people out in the wild.
yeah.
Right? If people have questions, I'm happy to answer questions, but I'm not looking to evangelize.
Right.
But there are times where my personal life, he has a Bitcoin podcast comes up, and that becomes, let's see if Ced can orange pill this person live at the barbecue in front of everybody, and whatever the situation is, and that person. So you try to figure out what to do, and I've seen 3 different things. There's the right, the left, and even have the religious.
Yeah.
And all 3 in America, at least, money can be connotated with evil.
Yeah.
So going left to right on this, or maybe starting with religious, money is evil. Therefore, your new money is not going to solve any problems. And that person has been difficult trying to say, well, if we fix the money, maybe we fix the world. And here's money's a tool, and we've come up with a better tool. And on the left, though, and if I speak of things like savings technology, anything defensive against inflation, it sounds like speculation or investment or greed. And if I've gone at, banking fees, you're being, again, it sounds like money. It's hard to, I feel like, overcome that notion, especially on the left, that capitalism is bad. So this new thing that's competing must be more of the same. And on the right, maybe I run into more status in terms of, you're not going to defeat the system. The state's going to ban it. And all of that, I guess, is projection from the person onto Bitcoin. But what I find confounding is they don't know anything about Bitcoin. But I find it very hard to kind of get around that political nature of the conversation.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's important, at least for me, to meet people like where they are in terms of values, and never yield on like the facts. And that's kind of how I try to like go about it. I am not really interested at all in convincing people to like Bitcoin for the same reasons that I do. I think it is, if you are, and I'm sort of the same way. I don't really, because this is sort of my job, is like Bitcoin research, Bitcoin advocacy. So, it does come up when, people ask like what I do for work. And so it still happens like you described, where I'm in a situation where I am talking to, someone about Bitcoin in like just a random setting. Uh, and usually I think my approach is to just like answer their questions, be pretty objective, and kind of just leave it at that. If that person wants to like
What?
get it,
Yeah. I'm
and
talking more the reverse, that they're not asking questions. It's almost
oh,
like, yeah, David, can you
oh,
give them the spiel?
oh
They want to hear the spiels. Give them the spiel,
yeah,
and you don't know what spiel to give, and so you might pick the unbanked, or you might pick savings technology, but
yeah. Well, I'll tell you one that I never pick, which might be a better answer to that question. I uh, you know, really never talk much about the price of Bitcoin. Like I did like an interview with, I can't remember who it was some television anchor one time. And one of the questions they asked me was like, so what do you think about the market, in the months ahead? And I kind of just immediately told the woman, like, look, if I knew the answer to that or cared about it, I'd work at a hedge fund. I wouldn't be working at a think tank. And that's sort of the approach that I take in the way I talk about Bitcoin. Uh, I obviously know, you know, Bitcoin has been really good to a lot of people that I know. It's been good to for me as like an investment, I guess. But I really never give like financial advice, and you know, try to talk about Bitcoin in a way that's almost, uh, you know, none of it is reliant on the price of Bitcoin. Because I think one of my earliest, takes on it was that, really what because I mean that's sort of the rabbit hole everyone goes down of like, oh, is Bitcoin a Ponzi scheme? Like, does it have, intrinsic value? Like, blah, blah, blah. Like those kind of early questions, like you sort of ask yourself when you're researching it. I always saw it more as like, again, like, because I saw it through this sort of political lens, that buying Bitcoin and holding it and using it bootstraps like the network, right? That like, uh, we're sort of in real-time price discovery of this like novel like asset, and it sort of works better if more people use it. And so I've always kind of seen Bitcoin less as like holding my coins for like the sort of eschatological like end of times when fiat collapses, and it's only the like Bitcoiners that have a bunch of Bitcoin. That's sort of never been a part of how I think about any of this. I've always just sort of saw it more as like, if you like the ends that Bitcoin achieves in society, then you kind of have a moral imperative to own some, and to like do your part to bootstrapping that network, to hold Bitcoin and increase the security budget, or to transact in Bitcoin, uh, particularly in situations where you may have otherwise been transacting in fiat. So, making my friends download like Lightning wallets so that I can, zap them sats instead of like Venmoing them or Cash Apping them. Uh, yeah. So I know there are so many ways that you can talk about Bitcoin, so many perspectives people have come to on like why it's good. Uh, but I guess just a little quirk about myself is that I can count on like maybe two hands the number of people that I have, told to, and I've sort of recommended buying Bitcoin to. I really shy away from, giving people financial advice. And I think that, like, on the sort of interpersonal level, definitely parallels to, how we work at BPI, which is that, at least, my read of things is that when people feel like they're being sold something, a certain set of, guardrails pop up, like, these sort of mental heuristics that we use to, protect ourselves. So people get defensive when you are trying to get them to, or they think you're trying to get them to, like, part ways with their money and buy something. And so, I've sort of extrapolated that, I guess, sort of personal principle of, like, orange pilling my friends by, convincing them that Bitcoin is cool and that they should want to, see it succeed, as opposed to, you should try to make a bunch of money, like, buying this, because what if it monetizes to the premium of gold? Like, wouldn't that be crazy? And do the same thing at BPI, which is, none of the sort of research or arguments that we make in favor of Bitcoin have anything to do with the price. They're all true whether, they're all true as long as the price is sufficient to prevent Bitcoin from being, like, 51% attacked. Other than that, they are sort of price agnostic, like, arguments for Bitcoin. And on both of those levels, the political and the interpersonal, I think that strategy has some benefits, namely because it engenders trust a little bit better than a dynamic where someone feels like they're being pitched or being, like, sold something. So yeah, I guess my sort of orange pilling is usually less like you should buy Bitcoin, and usually more like Bitcoin is really cool. It's really good for the world. You should get some in case it catches on. But mostly you should try to use it and learn more about it and see if you wind up, like, agreeing with me. So yeah.
I think that's words of wisdom, really wise. But, that's personal life. I think professional life is a little different. And so why should politicians be pro-Bitcoin?
Yeah. There are a lot of reasons that politicians should be pro-Bitcoin. It's sort of, I guess, the broad answer, before getting into, like, a bunch of kind of granular, like, sort of policy advantages of Bitcoin, are that it is a use. I mean, I think the truest answer is that it is a. I think it reinforces, like, U.S. Sort of hegemony. I think that it is, like, sort of on net, strategically beneficial for the United States that Bitcoin, like, exists. And you can kind of go down the different reasons I think that's true, but yeah, I think Bitcoin, like, sort of fundamentally, like, benefits, U.S. like sort of grand strategy interests, like our place, our standing in the world, relative to our adversaries. But these sort of specific reasons, you can kind of go through them. I think one, policymakers should welcome the sort of currency competition that Bitcoin, brings about. I don't think that that's something to fear. It's rather something to actively try to promote. Like, there are few sort of stark defenders of monopolies, and, like, most people on both sides of the aisle kind of understand, like, the basic economic argument for why a monopoly is bad, particularly when it's a monopoly over something that people have to buy or have to use, like power or food or money. The sort of tale as old as time itself is that when there's only one game in town, the consumer gets, like, screwed. They either through prices, through quality, like, if there's no competition, there's no innovation, there's no need to cater to consumers, and the sort of engine of the market, like, grinds to a halt. I think Bitcoin produces competition in this domain of money production in a way that will, and kind of, I don't know if it really has, but I think in theory and in principle ought to help correct some of the downsides of that monopoly that's now sort of being disrupted. But so I guess those are sort of two like big picture, like how Bitcoin plays into American sort of political economy. And I guess to elaborate a little bit more on the first, I think Bitcoin just has like American values sort of embedded in its code. Again, to the point that I think Bitcoin's incredibly political. I think Bitcoin makes a lot of sort of political assumptions about the world it exists in and its users. Like it guarantees property rights. It guarantees the freedom to transact. It basically enshrines like and exports capitalism to anyone that's using it. I think that's largely good for U.S. interests. But then, yeah, I mean, the sort of specific reasons range from like national security stuff to like how Bitcoin can prevent China from onboarding, global citizens to its central bank digital currency. How Bitcoin can kind of be a bulwark to the internationalization of the e-renminbi or whatever you want to call it, their CBDC. To some of the stuff I mentioned earlier about Bitcoin helping undermine authoritarian regimes, help sort of the most vulnerable people, spread human rights. In the United States, it also is sort of the next chapter of U.S. tech leadership. Like so much of the wealth that has been generated in America in the last like 20 years has been because we made it a good place to do like internet business and to do business generally. And so America really benefited from having policies at the turn of the century that made it attractive for like early internet entrepreneurs to do business here, to file and register here. And I think personally that Bitcoin will wind up being as transformative as the internet itself. And so in that sense, a politician ought to be pro Bitcoin because Bitcoin's not really going anywhere. And so in that sense, the sort of businesses that are formed, the revenue and spillover benefits that they generate are zero sum. So it's better if Bitcoin businesses are located here. There are a number of things that already make America a great place to have a Bitcoin business. On the mining side, the abundance of like natural resources that we've been blessed with, but also just the same reasons that make it reasonable to build a business here to begin with: the depth of our capital markets, the strength of our courts, the sort of culture of entrepreneurship, the access to high skilled labor, top universities. We have everything sort of going for us right now in Bitcoin. Is like this the way that I usually paint this, right? We have like 30% of mining. The most notable businesses in the space are almost all formed here. This is really a situation where it's just ours to lose if we mess it up. Like we don't have to try that hard to be pro Bitcoin or to even pass Bitcoin policy in order to really benefit from the network's growth. In a funny sense, the United States government gets to sort of position itself to earn like a de facto seigniorage on the network in that sense. Just by way of the taxes that citizens or companies that benefit from Bitcoin like pay. And so in that way, even if America can't control Bitcoin, it can set itself up to disproportionately benefit from its monetization to say that of gold, sort of benefit from that relatively and disproportionately to everyone else, its adversaries and other countries. There are, of course, reasons that politicians should support it on the jobs level, the energy stuff. Like, you can kind of find a political issue that someone cares about and often, relate it to Bitcoin. But I think the CBDC piece is like another important part of these political conversations. Like, why should you care about this? because there are a lot of people who are anti-CBDC who have not been orange pilled yet, which is like a natural and exciting phenomena, where the sort of increase in rhetoric and seriousness with which the government is expressing interest in pursuing a CBDC, a sharp uptick in people that are like, wow, that sounds horribly Orwellian and dystopian. Like, we maybe shouldn't have that. And so, yeah, I think Bitcoin will increasingly be politically relevant, simply just because it's a clear alternative to central bank digital currencies. But I guess if I were asked that question, like by a politician, I always just start with the idea that it is sort of representative of American values, and it helps us spread our values to anyone in the world, like the same way that the internet did, and the same way that the internet benefited America, because it was this global communications technology that spread our values of like free speech, and that improved our economic standing because of the impact that these internet businesses would have. Bitcoin is the exact same way, by giving people via the rails of the internet the ability to send value. Then you sort of digitally enshrine that right to transact. You export it to all of these users all over the world who may live in places with political economies very different from our own. And again, if the businesses that are ultimately built on sort of like the layer 3 of Bitcoin, so to speak, wind up being as impactful as some of the businesses built on the internet itself. And even if that doesn't happen, if just Bitcoin becomes a mainstay of economic life, then, like with the rise of the internet, America will be sitting pretty, and will benefit like greatly. So yeah, I mean, I think that we often try to make comparisons to Bitcoin in the early days of the internet, because it's a very sort of analogous, like, sort of argument for Bitcoin as like argument for the internet in those early days. Like, I think is it Timothy May, or I think it was Timothy May, who has like a line from the like Cypherpunk Manifesto, I think, if it's May, if I'm not mistaken, who talks about why the United States government objects to crypto. And of course, at the time, he didn't mean crypto, he meant like cryptography and like strong crypto, like they called it. And it's you read those talking points that he writes. The naysayers and the government will say that it helps terrorists and drug dealers and money launderers and cyber criminals. It's all just sort of like recycled. It's the exact, I mean, some of the exact same criticisms that were made about the internet back then are being made now about Bitcoin. There was a famous article in PC World about how much energy computers were using, and so the climate stuff, the ESG stuff, it's going to be used by criminal stuff. Like, we've been here before, and the internet story ended really well for the people that were the people who were bullish on the internet were right, and the people who were sort of naysayers of the internet were wrong. So I find that the sort of analogous structure of like circumstance of these two technologies, and of course the favorable outcome that happened with the internet, makes that kind of comparison useful for getting people to think about what this technology is, and why it may wind up being particularly useful and good. So yeah, try to compare it to the internet and explain how America is kind of in a position to benefit the same way, as long as it doesn't drive Bitcoiners and Bitcoin entrepreneurs from its borders.
Yeah, it almost hurts my head to think about the precipice countries are at. I try not to root for countries inherently. I think we're all the same. But I can't help but root for America to make smart decisions, so that my descendants who will probably live in America will do okay, and not suffer wrong, for no reason. If America would just be, make disastrous policy for Bitcoin or something. So in that regards, though, how do you frame up Bitcoin's energy usage to lawmakers? How do you deal with the FUD and the junk science? I mean, I think about, you have organizations like Greenpeace who have a lot of institutional political capital and goodwill coming out with, scathing campaigns about Bitcoin's energy usage.
Yeah. I mean, it is one of the biggest sort of facets of our work at BPI. And for precisely the reason you outlined, the Chris Larsen money is certainly being, put to good use. You have to start the conversation on Bitcoin and its energy usage with a sort of philosophical claim before you make sort of a sort of data-driven claim, which is that we use energy to gain things of value. You have to then make the argument that Bitcoin is valuable. As important as it may be in some circles to have a data-driven conversation. What are the exact methane emissions? What are the rather responsible sort of CO2 emissions? Like, what are the how much energy do miners use? Oh, like when it's raining in China, how much carbon do we put out versus when it's not? I think all of that is can kind of be how do I put this? Conducive to a discussion that really misses the forest for the trees. You have to start by asserting that and demonstrating that Bitcoin has value. Because if you don't do that and you just jump straight into, well, it's actually, it uses twice as much, renewable or, sustainable energy as any other technology, or, it's only one-fifth the emissions of YouTube alone. Like, those are all sort of useful stats, but they're not going to do much to change someone's mind who starts with the prior that Bitcoin is, useless. If Bitcoin is useless and you care about the, carbon emissions of the world, like if you are sort of a climate change, if you're scared of climate change and you think Bitcoin is useless, it doesn't matter how much energy it uses to those people. And why would it, right? Because any amount of energy used towards something that is not producing value is inherently a waste. So if you don't start from the sort of point that Bitcoin is like immensely valuable to a ton of people, if you don't start there, you really can't have you can't win somebody over. Because even if Bitcoin were to use, 100% sustainable energy, like there are sort of infinite rhetorical abstractions that one can use to, make it look bad just because it consumes a lot of energy. And a lot of people in the country are really concerned, rightly or wrongly, with, energy consumption. They'll say that power is like zero sum. And so the renewable energy that Bitcoin miners are getting is renewable energy that, some person trying to cook on their stove isn't getting, or is getting charged more because of. And so, yeah, of course, you can debate like why that stuff's all wrong. But I think with the conversation about Bitcoin's energy usage, it really needs to focus on Bitcoin's value to society, because it's only then that we can, compare Bitcoin to other things that we agree are useful. And that's when those statistics about like, yeah, did you know that, YouTube, like the freaking website, is responsible for 20% as much, CO2 emissions as Bitcoin? Like, you'll see articles, and I'm sure you've been around, I'm sure you've seen all of these, comparing Bitcoin's energy usage to small nations. And that sounds really scary. That's a ton of energy. When you compare Bitcoin to, YouTube, and you're like, oh, wait, this thing's just 5 YouTubes. Like, okay, I think it's a pretty low bar to convince someone that something is 5 times as valuable as YouTube as it is to convince someone that it's as valuable as like a nation state or whatever. So yeah, those kind of even though they are apples to oranges comparisons, I think are better situated and need to be situated, in a framework that sort of starts by asserting that Bitcoin is extremely socially valuable for the world. And then from there, I mean, it sort of depends on where you want to go with the conversation. But I guess there's an interesting sort of data point that I bring up sometimes, which is that everything that we invest in also has like associated emissions. And so one thing that sort of frustrates me is criticizing someone for allocating capital to Bitcoin because of its energy consumption or associated emissions, while staying silent on the energy consumption and associated emissions that are the result of one's 401k or their investment in any equity or any business that is also using energy to produce something of value. And what's sort of funny is that when you compare Bitcoin, and there's academic research that demonstrates this, when you compare Bitcoin to like the average basket of equities that a person in the United States owns, Bitcoin is sort of net decarbonizing in one of those portfolios. Like its associated emissions and energy consumption are relatively low, are sort of less than the average mix that comes from, or rather the effect that comes from owning the kind of an average mix of, equities. So it's pretty wild that how much time Bitcoin fans have to spend, responding to criticism for this, when anyone who owns like the S&P 500 is with their investment actually contributing more to climate change than if that entire portfolio were invested in Bitcoin. So that's also a kind of I think a useful way to like dislodge people from the Bitcoin bad because it uses a lot of energy thing. Like if that's how you're going to assess investments, you'd be in the interest of the climate better off convincing people to divest from the S&P 500. So I think that's kind of just a useful like reminder that it's not just Bitcoin, it's everything that we invest in, because again, everything that creates value or creates value required energy for that to happen. But then there's all sorts of points here, and I think your audience is probably from my summation, pretty familiar with these arguments. So I'll kind of just touch on them briefly, because I think almost all of your listeners have probably heard these. But I'm really excited about the future of Bitcoin and renewables. I'm excited about the future of Bitcoin and waste methane cleanup, and the usage of Bitcoin as flexible load for power grids. Has already proven to be real and beneficial. It's a complicated question, and another thing that I often really always point out to people is that so much of the evidence and data and information about Bitcoin mining is just sort of like made up and wrong. Everyone remembers the famous what was it, like the Newsweek and World Economic Forum headline from 2017 that said mining on track to use all the world's energy by 2020. In meetings with staffers, I usually kind of bring that up if there's an opportune moment, because they may be reading studies that have similarly alarming conclusions that they just got handed to them in the meeting prior by a Ripple lobbyist or someone else. And so pointing out how so much of the research that's been done about Bitcoin does not take into account the difficulty adjustment, does not take into account the halving, and so of course all of these energy consumption statistics are absurd when they don't factor in those two things. It's pretty easy to say that, oh well, Bitcoin's going to use all the world's energy. That's obviously not true. I guess one other sort of piece about this is that I do expect this issue to go away. I don't know what the timeline looks like. I don't know whether that's like 2 halvings from now or 3 halvings from now. But I think sort of just the economics of Bitcoin mining are such that you know the and paired with the difficulty adjustment in the halving, I just don't think Bitcoin's going to wind up using that much energy. And the energy that it does use, it will use a lot. But what I should say is that it won't use that much energy that was not already sort of wasted, because it won't be profitable to mine. Like when you've got pockets of energy that are at zero cost, it's not paying grid rates or some negotiated rate like isn't going to be able to necessarily compete with solar projects or renewable projects that are just sitting on massive excess production that doesn't cost them the buyer anything. So I do think that Bitcoin emissions will likely peak, and may already have, for the people that are concerned with that. But I do think that in the short term, it's going to remain one of the really popular battle lines on which Bitcoin is being debated. And yeah, I think that while it's important to have good data and good research to make the points about how Bitcoin benefits the environment, it's just one of a host of reasons that some policymakers and some in DC don't like it. And so what I think what will likely happen is that Bitcoiners, like on many things, will be probably vindicated for their correct approximations of how the energy trends with Bitcoin would play out. But the individual or organization that is anti-Bitcoin will not be appeased at that moment, right? It'll just be on to the next thing, and the next reason that Bitcoin is bad. So can't get lost in the sauce, right? Like you kind of have to just stick to explaining like why credibly neutral, decentralized, censorship resistant money, accessible to anyone with an internet connection, is like remarkably good for the world, because that argument is true no matter what people say about Bitcoin, and why it's bad or why it's risky. Like no matter the critique, they've got to weigh the damage that they see Bitcoin causing in some particular way with the benefit that it creates. So I think it's always better to be offensively sort of positioned. Like if you're always on the back foot, like rhetorically, you're just never going to win, right? Like if the debate isn't about is Bitcoin good, but is it about is Bitcoin bad for the environment, then the best place that you can wind up, even if you win that debate, is that Bitcoin is not bad for the environment. And it's like, okay, well, what have you really accomplished there? You've expended a lot of work, a lot of resources, a lot of time, energy, whatever, just to disarm like one of many critiques. Like if the best you can do in a position or in a sort of argument like that is parry critiques, like you may parry all of them, but that sort of mental association of like Bitcoin is bad for the environment, that's going to stick around. And you're not gonna. I don't think you're going to convince anyone, or very few people, that Bitcoin is good solely because of its environmental impacts. The exception being, I think, people that are already like energy sort of practitioners or scholars, like people that are deep in the sort of renewable tech space and the the energy space generally. I think a lot of those people actually do latch on to that aspect of Bitcoin, and it becomes the thing that drives them to to care about it. But I think for the like average policymaker, it's going to remain a talking point and an issue for a while, until my sort of hunch is that if my understanding of the protocol is somewhat right, that it won't be a sort of forever issue with Bitcoin. And then I guess the last thing I would say is, and usually I'd mention this sooner, but all of this stuff stops mattering if we just had like nuclear energy, right? And so another way that you can kind of take a Bitcoin energy debate is just by saying, look, if you're upset about the energy mix, the sources of the electricity that powers our economy, maybe we should just do nuclear. So I'm also I don't talk about this a ton, but I'm also a pretty big fan of nuclear energy. And so so I mean, in my perfect world, we just have a nuclear energy abundance in America, and nobody cares what energy Bitcoin miners are using. But that's sort of utopian thinking for now, I'm afraid.
We'll see how that plays out. And I got a couple of shows on mining coming up. How many people in Congress do you think support Bitcoin? And I don't know if we have to go circles and circles, whether we have to, whether you could think support Bitcoin versus even get Bitcoin. But how many people support Bitcoin in Congress?
That is a good question. I would say in Congress there are probably less than like 8 or less, sort of vocal supporters of, and I'm kind of including Bitcoin and crypto here, of crypto broadly. I think there's a fair number that like are quiet about it, and they're just kind of like whatever, like it's just some new industry, like I'll be pro that industry and maybe get some money from them. I think there are very few who would be able to like sort of sufficiently explain why Bitcoin is different from crypto. If you start adding a kind of any like sort of objective test to like your question, do they understand how how proof of work works? Like, boy, that number is going to go down significantly. Do they understand how proof of stake works? That number is going to go down significantly. But I think the lawmaker education is only one piece of it. I mean, really, it's like the staffers that have these issues in their sort of policy portfolios, who are the ones kind of meeting with everyone from the blockchain association to Coin Center to us to whoever it is, to the Chris Larsons and the Greenpeace people, and I think a lot of staffers. I mean, I think a lot of work has been done to educate staffers over the past few years on, again, most of it on sort of just digital assets and on crypto. There are definitely more staffers that are receptive to the Bitcoin isn't crypto message. But I don't have exact numbers. It's not many. To be fair, there aren't that many that are like ardent critics either. Like the overwhelming majority of people are, just kind of silent on the issue, and probably don't have incredibly strong, feelings either way. But yeah, I mean, the FTX stuff, like even though Bitcoiners, I think maybe feel like, oh, that's not about us, like they didn't even have Bitcoin. That situation has had like very, very tangible impacts on Bitcoin's perception in Washington, simply because of its association to crypto. And so, there are a lot of politicians who are probably going to be hesitant to speak out in favor of crypto because it was revealed that they, received a sizable check from Sam. And so that incident sort of has had a cascade effect where, like, I think there are a lot of members for whom, any crypto thing is a sort of politically toxic to them right now, which makes it a really good time for our message, because we're able to, we were not, one of the people telling members of Congress that, FTX was amazing and that you should listen to everything they have to say about regulation and exchange regulation. I wouldn't say we were like critics of FTX, but our message has kind of been like, yeah, we're sort of, maybe some cool things will happen in crypto. Like, who knows? They for now, tough to say. A lot of Ponzi schemes, a lot of scams, but also some like objectively cool things from a sort of computer science perspective, from a business perspective. But these are basically like startups on a blockchain. I mean, there's just because you add a token in a blockchain doesn't mean that you're not building just a startup company. So we're like, yeah, there are some cool crypto startups maybe, but yeah, I mean, they're mostly scams, and Bitcoin has nothing to do with any of them. It's like fundamentally different. So that's an important message for people to hear now, and I hope that it's one that allows some of the people that were burned by the donations from Sam and their entanglement with FTX to kind of go down the same path that a lot of people who wind up at Bitcoin as just regular people have, which is you hear of people all the time who say like, oh, I got wrecked trading shitcoins, and then I found Bitcoin, and that's a lot of people's like arcs. Yeah, I think a lot of people in DC got wrecked trading shitcoins, and the sort of common reaction to getting wrecked by shitcoins is finding Bitcoin. So I hope that the I hope that sort of story plays out the same way in DC. And I think there's a good chance that it can, especially if we're able to kind of keep doing the stuff that we're doing, and that other folks who are advocating for Bitcoin are able to do the same. Because yeah, it's really not good when the overwhelming majority of lawmakers could not tell you how any of this works. They could not really tell you for the life of them why Bitcoin is different from Ethereum, or why it's different from Dogecoin. And so, yeah, until that, changes, I'm going to be somewhat nervous about the policy outcomes coming out of Washington.
Yeah, you say policy outcomes. You mentioned Warren Davidson, I think twice at least on the show, and very interesting. I remember hearing him, I think with Caitlin Long on a Peter McCormack What Bitcoin Did episode. It was very impactful on me. The episode, I think, was about marijuana and whether it should be legal or not legal, or maybe the segment was. And Warren Davidson had a lot of interesting points around, because I think he's from Wyoming. He's connected to.
No, he's from Ohio.
Warren Davidson from Ohio. They might.
Lummis is Wyoming.
Lummis is Wyoming. I might be confusing Warren Davidson with someone else. But there was a lawmaker. I thought it was from Wyoming. I think he's the chief of staff for Cynthia Lummis.
Oh, okay.
And that's what I think I'm confusing him with. But and he was saying how if you make something legal, all of a sudden you have a white market and a black market. So because you've made it illegal, legal, now all of a sudden you have taxes, you have regulation, and you have all these unintended consequences. And one of the examples he was using was that in his state, it was illegal to sell your neighbor like a pie, an apple pie, for like $10. Like, Aunt Mary is really good at his apple pie. She wants to make a few extras. She'd like to sell them around town. That would be legal. She doesn't have a business, a license, labeling. She'd get people sick. And
libertarians have a really good point, by the way.
Yeah, he fought for the right for that not to be illegal. But the conversation turned to like, not everything needs to be made legal for it to be illegal. You could just decriminalize it, I think that's kind of interesting. And so along those lines, though, like, you speak of like a politically toxic, like Elizabeth Warren was someone who I thought, based on my impression of her early in her career, that she would be someone who would have embraced Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And she's been a confounding, maybe political figure, and on that one note to me, being the anti-banking platform she runs on, it seems like.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I've sort of traversed the political spectrum myself over my life. But there was a time when I was phone banking for Elizabeth Warren. just kind of on the side. So that's definitely pretty funny that she is where she is now on Bitcoin. I don't have like a sort of unique insight into her state of mind on Bitcoin. I don't know whether her sort of negativity is the result of campaign contributions, whether it's the sort of result of the sort of just like emergent social phenomenon of like the people who she has around her and trusts all have you know negative views on crypto and Bitcoin. I think if she were armed with the truth about Bitcoin, it would be pretty easy for her to be in favor of it. I think it does, to the point you made, align with many of her stated values. I think it's funny because like one of the left wing criticisms of Bitcoin that I think is I almost never hear, but I wish that I did because I think it's a fascinating argument. Is that I just wish people's sort of criticisms of Bitcoin were like good arguments. Like honestly, for example, like I think a much better argument than the ESG stuff and all the other nonsense people say is like someone says, look, I think that the state is good and useful in taming markets, and I think that we need to have taxes because I believe that the government should have a social safety net that's like strong, and I think that Bitcoin, if it succeeds, might rub off against or sort of trade off against the government's ability to raise taxes and fund social programs. Like that's actually a sort of is a good argument and it's something that strikes at like the essence of the political economy of Bitcoin, itself and its sort of role in our current economy. Unfortunately, like Elizabeth Warren is not making a sort of principled progressive argument against a Bitcoin or one that like reflects a sort of deeper understanding of it. She's kind of just saying a bunch of stuff that's like wrong, and she's been very aggressive with this, and so I think it's unlikely that she flips her position. I think she's probably in too deep, but my hope is that she is unsuccessful in corralling her colleagues on the left side of the aisle into agreeing with her positions. If because I think it's also true that to a point we talked about earlier in the show, that Bitcoin does have properties and benefits that should make it attractive to those on the left. As long as like a sizable chunk of her colleagues think that Bitcoin is good, like as long as it's not a mainstay position of the DNC that Bitcoin is bad, I think it's gonna be fine. But yeah, and then one other comment, I guess, about the sort of like apple pie story. See, I think Bitcoin's sort of in a similar place where a lot of crypto tokens, they like need something from the government, right? They need to not be sued for promoting an unregistered security, among other things. Bitcoin kind of just would prefer to be like left alone. I mean, there are obviously things that would be helpful, like a de minimis exemption on capital gains tax would probably help Bitcoin fill that role of like competing against Visa and MasterCard that I alluded to earlier. But as long as people can run their own nodes, as long as people can mine, as long as people can have a sort of right to self-custody that can't be infringed without due process or whatever. I think those are kind of the main policy objectives of Bitcoin. Like we don't really need really anything. But if I were to ask for any policies, and the policies we do sort of argue are good, it's stuff that makes it easier for Bitcoin companies to do business here. It's stuff that makes it easier for Bitcoiners to live here. It's stuff that makes it easier for Bitcoin to become a better integrated with, daily life for people. And it's something that prevents, sort of infringements on people's ability to self-custody, to mine, to run a node. If you can do those things, like if you can self-custody, run a node, and mine, you're pretty much set there. Everything else is sort of icing at that point.
Yeah, I hear you on that. Do you think there's any chance the US will attempt to ban Bitcoin, and would it be able to stop Bitcoin?
Obviously it's sort of like a Bayesian question. Like there's a greater than 0% chance that the government tries to ban Bitcoin. I don't have any kind of approximation of what that probability is. There are certain scenarios that I could see, particularly like during sort of a crisis or something, where decisions are being made super quickly, and ban Bitcoin is like number 7 on a list of things that the government's trying to do to put out some massive fire. My gut instinct is that it's extremely unlikely, just because of how far along we are, but not impossible. Do I think the government could stop Bitcoin? No, not really. I think that the government could nuke the price of Bitcoin pretty substantially. I think like the government even announcing that it intended to ban crypto or ban Bitcoin, like boy, would that be a wicked candle down. So I do not underestimate an announcements like that's ability to evaporate like billions and billions of dollars of wealth in the Bitcoin network. I think a lot of selling would happen. And I haven't really thought too deeply about like would there be like how low would the price need to go? I mean, I think it would be bad for Bitcoin if Bitcoin got banned in America. The counterpoint to that is that after sort of surviving that ban, Bitcoin's value proposition would be much clearer to people. And so I think both of those things can be true. Like I think it can be an unfortunate outcome that America bans it. But it could also wind up being good. And I wouldn't be surprised if a ban were followed by an unbanning of Bitcoin. But yeah, I don't think that the government can really stop Bitcoin, and I think it's sort of that is sort of an idea that is, I think, like well baked into much of the policy discourse around Bitcoin. Like there are I think that's kind of one of there's like some memes about Bitcoin, I guess, that have become very like well known on the Hill. Like one is that Bitcoin is transparent, right? That all blockchain activity takes place on a public ledger, and so you can trace any of it, the same way that you would with a financial institution. And look at chain analysis. Like you shouldn't be scared. You've got all these surveillance tools, and it's all inherently public. Like that is well understood. I think the idea that you can't really stop Bitcoin, at least from producing new blocks, that you can't stop people from running like a Raspberry Pi, that you can't govern the thousands of people that are, mining and running nodes outside of our jurisdiction. I think that also is sort of well understood for what it's worth. But yeah, I don't really think the government could like stop Bitcoin, but I think it could seriously threaten it, just because depending on how suppressed the price might be, and for how long, like that could be like dangerous if it really got low. But yeah, I mean, all those are extreme sort of tail risk scenarios. Like functionally, TikTok next block, like there's really nothing the government can do about that. But yeah, I do think it would be the craziest fire sale of Bitcoin like ever, if they announced that they were going to ban it. Like you'd be able to scoop up some really cheap sats if that's what you wanted to do.
Yeah, that would be fascinating. I have a follow-up question there, but I'm going to skip to. I want to hear a little bit about your rabbit hole story. If you could share your rabbit hole story with Bitcoin.
Yeah, I guess I used it in middle school to well, I first used Bitcoin in middle school, was sort of, yeah, maybe I won't talk about exactly what I was doing with Bitcoin, but when I saw it, it like immediately made like sense to me. I told you I did not buy a significant amount of Bitcoin at the time. I was like 13. It was like $60 a Bitcoin. Um, and it just sort of made like intuitive sense to me. I was like, oh, it's internet money. Like we probably need that. That checks out. Like whatever. And it didn't really feel like a secret either. I mean, I remember there was it's like an NPR article about it. There was a like it was like people were talking about it at school. Like my friends were interested in it. So I guess what I didn't really pay attention to was like the price of Bitcoin. Uh, I didn't understand that it was I didn't really understand the sort of supply and demand dynamics around it. I didn't understand that it had a capped supply, didn't know what the halving was, didn't know what the block reward was. Uh, I saw that it was like extremely volatile. And I guess my sort of retrofitted explanation of that was like, oh, of course it is. It's internet money. It's not pegged to anything. It's just like I understood that it had extreme float in the price and that it wasn't like stable. But I kind of just primarily was interested in it for its utility. I also thought at the time that Bitcoin payments were anonymous. Like that was it was not as like sort of well. I mean, I'm sure if I was like deep on the talk forums or like really looking for this, I could have easily found information to the contrary. But I certainly at the time was led to believe that Bitcoin was anonymous. And then had some like dust in a wallet from then, kind of paid attention to it over time. It started coming up in like debate rounds that I would do in like high school debate, like topics of like sanctions evasion and like, oh, well, this country will just use Bitcoin and blah, 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 blah. So I kind of had to research it in that sense. Um, I don't know. I guess there was a point where I like really was interested in Bitcoin, but wasn't fully like sold on it. Like I, was kind of like, this is cool. I hope it works. But it wasn't necessarily something that I had like an immense amount of like confidence in like succeeding. Like especially like earlier on, it just kind of seemed like I don't know. I mean, it's sort of an internet generation kid, and so it's like there's all sorts of times on the internet where you see people kind of crowdsource something in like a really crazy way, like raising money for a cause or finding a lost, the owner of a lost pet or like whatever it is. And it kind of reminded me more of like those things where it was just like, wow, like a bunch of people on the internet are really just getting together and trying to like meme a money like into existence, just kind of like make it and believe in it enough such that it like becomes real. Um, so then there was just a point where I kind of was like, all right, like I need to know whether or not like I'm gonna like seriously sort of bet on this, I guess. And then just kind of hold up for a while, like reading like everything that I could, like reading old talk forum blog posts, reading reports, reading Twitter, and consuming a bunch of content and just trying to like learn more about money, about the financial system. Like my rabbit hole was sort of like sprawling and not very pointed. uh but yeah, I eventually just kind of came to the conclusion that it was like the coolest kind of thing happening, and that like when it was all said and done, I was like, this is something that I want to kind of be all in on, basically. Like this, if we can kind of make this Bitcoin thing like real and happen, like the world's going to be like a better place for it. So I guess it was sort of a part of my life for since I was a kid. But it was after sort of that it really like picked up. And then, I went to college and it was like, oh shoot, the guy that runs Bitcoin Magazine or the CEO of Bitcoin Magazine, is a graduate of this program. And it's like, oh shoot, like there's a bunch of like Alabama people that work there and that are into this. And so that all sort of like certainly kind of solidified my interest in Bitcoin and my, beliefs about what it's going to do to society.
Yeah. there was a moment where you were talking about, you came across it in middle school and everyone was talking about it. And I totally relate to that, whether it was baseball cards or the Super Bowl or, some girl from our favorite sitcom. But I don't know if 10 years later we would still be talking about that.
Yeah.
But we would be aware. So my question there is twofold. Like, how many of maybe your peers from then, I'm assuming there's a lot of awareness about Bitcoin. I don't know how many are still talking about it or interested in it, but are people aware about it from back then? I mean, like your peers,
Yeah.
and do they talk about it? Are they interested in it? Or did it
Yeah.
just kind of come and go like Cabbage Patch Dolls and Trolls? And
I think for most people it came and went. Yeah, I know a handful of people that were early sort of believers in Bitcoin, and remain really involved in it. Funny enough, like really none of them are on Twitter or like work in the like space at all. But yeah, like I have yeah, I definitely have friends who you know for example, I've got a friend who got really into mining at the around that time. Like I actually remember like going over to his house and we were trying to like mine from our like computers or whatever. And I remember it was like the ant miner, like it was like a USB stick that you could basically like plug into a computer and like mine that way. Um, but yeah, I think for most people, like, and again, like for me, this was like seventh grade. So, very few people are interested in the same things that
yeah,
they were interested in seventh grade. But yeah, I think it's like, it's less of a novelty, I guess. Like people don't really ask what is Bitcoin anymore. Whereas that used to be like the conversation, like, what is it? Now it's kind of like, should I buy it or is it a scam? But people seem to kind of know what it is. Like I think it's certainly uh, sort of filled the public consciousness like a lot since then, which has been kind of crazy. Because yeah, again, like I think I probably would have bought a lot more if I had thought that $65 Bitcoin prices was like particularly early. It just didn't feel like that. It seemed like everybody knows about this, and so
mm.
obviously that wasn't the case.
I think
But
that's
yeah,
that. Yeah,
yeah,
and
I know some people basically, to answer your question, who kind of got into it, when they were young, and have continued to, hold and, pay attention, lost a bunch of money shitcoining, like all the sort of classic things. Yeah.
I could totally relate to that inherent notion of like, I know about this, so everyone must know about
Yeah.
this. It must be where it's supposed to be. Um, it's I always wonder if the U.S. government's going to reveal a bag at some point or go on a tear and buy some Bitcoin. And I get the notion that I get all the reasons why they're not going to, or they would be the last to. But on one side of the coin, if they did, no matter what it did to the Bitcoin price, no matter what they ended up accumulating, they would probably make Americans and America, if not, I mean, you could argue it's already the wealthiest country in the world, but it would solidify maybe its wealthiest position in the world. I mean, it would be making Americans rich, because I would proffer to say Americans hold more Bitcoin than any other constituency.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Do you think America's ever going to go on a tear and buy some Bitcoin?
It depends on what you mean by tear, but yeah, I think it would be extremely reasonable for America to have some Bitcoin as a hedge, basically. I think that is the most likely and most reasonable scenario in which the US government, sort of deliberately acquires a meaningful portion of the coins. Our entire existence, both domestically and in the international sphere, uh, is sort of hanging by the thread of our current monetary system and the U.S. Treasury bill. And so for the same reason that like for example, was it like Greg Foss, talks about Bitcoin as sort of a risk on basically the collapse of the like sovereign like bond market. Who's in sort of who is most incentivized financially to hedge against that outcome. It's the United States. And so, again, I think the most likely scenario would be if they, grab a little in case it catches on, but also to, I think it would be a wise strategic decision, because if the because it will sort of trade inversely to our current economic system, at the sort of ends of the like the sort of the far ends of like the tail there. Like if the US bond market like collapses, Bitcoin would go up. So it's a good hedge for people, I guess, and a lot of people see it that way as like a personal hedge. So it's really no different on the nation state level. As to when that might happen, I have no idea. Will that happen? Maybe not. But I think we're already starting to see countries, particularly those that are, perhaps perceive some risk of being excluded from the financial system via sanctions, start to think seriously about and see the merit of maybe adding, reducing their gold holdings maybe and adding a little bit of Bitcoin. So I think the sanctions on Russia were sort of a Rubicon moment in financial and like monetary history. Like the notion that for all these states that one day they could just not have this money that they thought they did, that we still have not seen the nearly the end of the sort of change in thinking that's going to bring about in decision makers in other countries. So yeah, I think more countries will probably buy Bitcoin over the next like decade or so. That sort of roughly tracks with my sort of personal hypothesis or thesis about how all this will play out. And yeah, I for one do hope the American government decides to hedge a little bit by buying some Bitcoin, but we'll see. I know they had a bunch after the Silk Road, and then I think Tim Draper bought most of them, or maybe all of them. And to your other question, I don't know if there's a secret Bitcoin stash. Wouldn't shock me, but I have no idea.
Yeah. Well, there's so much we could cover in the foreign affairs, and I definitely have to have you back sometime. We could get into Russia, Ukraine, China, CBDC, the currency wars, stable coins. But to round it out a bit, like, do you think we're going to have to elect Bitcoiners? Is there going to be a Bitcoin only party one day?
Yes and no. Yes, I think it would be good to elect Bitcoiners, for the same reason it's good to elect anyone who cares about the same things that you do. You can shit on it all you want and critique it till you're blue in the face, but we live in there's a sort of epistemic pluralism and in the context of a democracy. And so there's a bunch of opinions that people have, and the more people that share your opinions, the more that the government responds in that particular way. So again, like broadly, if you care about Bitcoin, it is like obviously in your interest to have more people that also care about Bitcoin be in office. Do I think that there will be an orange party? No, I really don't. I would be interested in putting money on that with anybody who disagrees with me. By the way, if anybody wants to put, I know there's some real like orange party people out there. I will bet you Bitcoin over a very long time frame if you want, because I feel pretty confident that there won't be an orange party. Mostly nothing to do with Bitcoin really, just because the two-party system that we have is just not the game theory just doesn't really work out for third parties. Like it just never makes a ton of sense. And so yeah, I think my what I hope is that we just see more and more Bitcoiners represented among both Democrats and Republicans. but yeah, no, I am extremely bearish on the existence of an orange party, and I don't really think that we need one. That's not to say, however, that the combined voices of the Bitcoin community cannot be politically powerful, even absent a party structure. Um, I know this is like something I've talked about on shows before, but it's easy to overlook or to understate uh, how powerful sort of small groups of like extremely passionate people can be in the political process. Like you can go through a laundry list of hot button political issues and see that uh, it's really just kind of a handful of people that care a lot one way or the other. And then most people just don't care that much. And so oftentimes when you see a large discrepancy between the public's opinion about something and the government's policy on that thing, it's because the 90% of people that are in favor of something uh, are sort of unmotivated and don't care that much. Like they'll mark on a poll that they're in favor of it, but the 10% of people who aren't will call the politicians, blow up their phones, will send them emails, will donate money. Like for them, it's their sort of number one issue. And so I think like issue driven voters and just citizens can make like a massive like difference. The notable example there is like gun control, or specifically background checks, like universal background checks on firearm transfers and sales. Right now, if you buy a gun at like an FFA, you have to get a background check. But at least in Alabama, like where I live, I could just sell you a gun in like my front yard of my house or in like a parking lot. As long as I don't have any reason to believe that you're a criminal or going to use it for crime, you can pay me in cash. I can hand you a gun, and you can go to the range with it or whatever. Regardless of your opinion about that which has come to be known as the gun show loophole. um it's a good example for what I'm talking about, where if you poll Americans and say, should we have universal background checks on private sales and transfers of firearms, it's like 90% of Americans say yes. Even like 70-80% of NRA members like concede that that's probably a good thing. Like we should know who's buying guns, and we should know that they're not a criminal. But calls to politicians over regarding universal background checks are 7-1, 8-1 against. The concentration of political lobbying and money and all of those things is sort of spearheaded by the sort of fanatical minority. And so I would encourage people not to underappreciate the power of a fanatical minority. But I don't think you need a political party to to have that power. In fact, I think it could be a pretty big waste of time and of energy. I think Bitcoiners can influence the political process pretty profoundly, frankly. So we'll see if that plays out over the years. But my hunch is that they can and they will.
I hear you. So if you could orange pill any politician in the world, who would it be?
Any politician in the world currently serving, or could it be
Currently serving?
Currently serving.
You could former is fine too. Whatever you want.
I was gonna say I think like such a like kind of trivial answer, but I think probably like Joe Biden, just because he's like the current president. But I actually think if you really expanded that question, it would be maybe either Bernie Sanders or Barack Obama, because I think the Republicans really get Bitcoin mostly. And I think if one of those kind of because Biden is just, so many people don't take him seriously, even on the left, but so many people on that side of the aisle love Barack Obama. His I think public reputation is certainly kind of better than Biden's or Trump's. Like I think people generally hate Obama less than they do the two of them. Someone like that, who's kind of like a mainstay Democrat, being like ardently pro Bitcoin, would really hamper the efforts of, the Elizabeth Warrens of the world, trying to make anti-crypto policy a plank of the Democratic Party. So I guess the way I thought about that question is like, who would best prevent a, you know, mass adoption on the DNC of being anti-Bitcoin? And so I think it's got to be somebody like one of those two. So I think if Bernie or Obama, were champions of Bitcoin, I would probably be out of a job. I wouldn't have all that much to do.
That's funny. Bringing it to the local level, how can people help? What can they do?
Yeah. I think as far as what they can do in their, communities, there's policy, like you said, at all levels of government. And so whether that's, attending, meetings, setting up meetings with, local officials who you think might take the time to listen to you and have something to do, after listening to you. That's great. I mean, you don't want to sort of bother people who have no business, who have nothing to do with sort of Bitcoin or crypto issues, and just, telling them how much you love it. But when policy relevant to Bitcoin, comes up in your state or your jurisdiction, there are a lot of ways to get plugged in. There are groups like us that you can reach out to get help on like research or informational like packets to leave behind. On the sort of broader like level though of like the kind of fight in like Washington for Bitcoin, there are like a number of groups that are doing good work on that front, and so if you're the kind of Bitcoiner who doesn't like politics at all, but maybe tacitly concedes that it'd be better if America were not really anti-Bitcoin, then my recommendation would be to send some Bitcoin to an organization like us, so that you can just not think about it, and we can go work on this stuff. But if not us, there are other Bitcoin advocacy groups and different kind of nonprofits with different strategies and different missions that you can evaluate. To my knowledge, we're the only Bitcoin sort of focused think tank. And so if you like our strategy and think that we need to be countering, the ESG research of Greenpeace and Chris Larson, if you think that our sort of mission of convincing lawmakers that Bitcoin benefits U.S. interests, is an appealing one to you, then I'd consider reaching out and talking more with me or the people I work with about what we do. We rely on basically charity. We do rely on charity to run. The other final pitch I'll add is that it's a tax write-off. We are a 501c3. So if Bitcoin has been good to you, if you've got some capital gains to offset, and you want to support the effort to educate policymakers on Bitcoin, I'm biased, but I would recommend donating to BPI.
Yeah. And, I'm sure we're not saving whales here. We are slaying dragons. Thank you, David. This has been so dope. I love what you're doing. Where can people find you and check out and help BPI?
Yeah, you can go to, well, I guess on Twitter, I'm just David Zell _. Our website is btcpolicy.org. You can donate there. We also have an OpenSats page, which is a Bitcoin nonprofit that many of your listeners might be familiar with. They help developers and other people kind of working in the Bitcoin ecosystem receive tax deductible funding for their work. So we've got a page there that you can donate to as well. We're still working on getting a BTC Pay server set up. That should be happening soon. But for now, if you want to donate Bitcoin, best to go through OpenSats. So yeah, you can find me on Twitter there. Find us at btcpolicy.org or search Bitcoin Policy Institute on Twitter. And you can check out our OpenSats page as well and see some of our fundraising goals.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yo, thank you for listening. Please make sure that you're subscribed to the Bitcoin Matrix podcast so you don't miss out on any fresh and dope content. I want to thank David Zell for coming on the show. I also want to thank our sponsors, River, CoinKite, and the Bitcoin Conference for powering the show. If you're digging the chats, all I ask is that you leave a 5-star review wherever you dome your podcast, because that's the best way to spread the word so I can keep grinding out thought-provoking conversations about Bitcoin. Keep learning, keep stacking, and stay laser focused out there. This is Cedric. Peace.